Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. This is the fifth episode of the series. We just moved to the Rockies after 16 years as general manager of the Kansas City Royals and 11 years as general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Probably going to be our final challenge here with OOTP 23. So sincerely appreciate everyone who's watched the first few episodes of the series, taken the time to comment, like the videos. If you haven't subscribed, would absolutely appreciate it. And hope we have an interesting series here and a lot of interesting interaction with the viewers and hopefully ultimately some success on the field. Just by way of background, I did the first four episodes for the series, the ones that have already been posted before this one. I did them all last weekend while the divisional football games were going on, so I know that some of you gave me good suggestions throughout the week on things to do. Apologize for not being able to execute on some of those things, but those first four episodes were already produced and played by the time I even shared the first one. So, although I do appreciate a lot of the comments, and sometimes when I'm kind of live in between episodes, definitely take people's suggestions in real life. Did not have the opportunity to do that this time around. Did want to check in on a few things that people have commented on over the last week or so, though. Francis C. mentioned our trade for Victor Gonzalez. As you can see right here on our goals, one goal was to upgrade at catcher this year, given that I question whether we're going to play 500 ball, and I'm unsure whether we're going to sign Jamal Cohen to an extension. Figured we had to go hard at least one of the goals for ownership. So we did make a trade right when we took the team over within days, picking up Victor Gonzalez from Tampa Bay. And Francis kind of made the point that, might have been a smarter decision to kind of wait and see the scouting reports on all the players before you made that decision, given that I had just taken over the team, had just fired the old scout and brought on a new scout. And it was a very good point. I did feel that in the case of Gonzalez being a 31-year-old, 30-year-old at the time we traded for him, and a player who at this point is an all-star, two-time Silver Slugger, and has a pretty good track record of success, that I kind of knew what I was getting with him. He definitely is a player who seems to be on the downside of his career in terms of his production. His OPS plus has declined for 4 consecutive seasons now, and he's now on the wrong side of 30, as I said, but felt like the home run power would probably be there, and he could be a pretty good offensive player in Colorado. And then as far as that big contract, we did ultimately get a situation where Tampa Bay retained 70% of it because of some pretty good players that we put into the deal. So totally agree with the assessment that if we had waited, would have known more about the player, known more what we were getting, but felt like I was excited. It was a new series, and I just wanted to start getting stuff done. Speaking of getting stuff done, looking at the financials, feel like we're in a pretty good spot to start things off. When we started the series back in October of 2048, fan interest was only a 67, and we bumped it up to 97. Now, we have made a few trades, like the one I mentioned for Gonzalez. Picked up one of our former pitchers with Pittsburgh, Juan Bin Daoud, in a trade. Have made a few other smaller trades, and also a few free agent acquisitions, and then signing some of our arbitration eligible players to extensions before they went to arbitration also helped us there. But big boost in fan interest over the winter, and ownership actually increased our budget. I can't even remember when, but at some point during the winter, I don't know whether it was a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago in game time at this point, but they increased our budget. Now, granted, we're still 20th in baseball, so not great, but $200 million is a lot more than kind of have ever had with Pittsburgh or with Kansas City, I think. So we'll enjoy having that advantage as we try to rebuild this team. Did lower ticket prices a bit, so we're set to sell a lot more season tickets, hopefully a lot more attendance, and then ultimately more revenue per game than the Rockies did last year, which would be positive. When the budget got increased, made sure that we were investing heavily in scouting and development. I think that that is critical. I'll do my final plug for it here. That I do think one of the only things you can do to differentiate yourself in OOTP is very good international scouting. We've got an excellent scout who's highly favored tools as far as international scouting, and then investing heavily in the scouting budget with a big chunk of it going to international scouting will ultimately, hopefully over time, help you get more prospects like Alex Ramirez into your international complex that kind of come there through your scout discovering them rather than the one shot a year you get at an international amateur free agent. Also got a comment from Matt Jones about a young pitching prospect. I think he was talking about Young Ha Kim, who's now 18-year-old out of Korea. He's only, at this point, now that we have very high scouting accuracy on him, only looks like a 2.5-star potential player, but great personality, high leadership, adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence. Like the fact that he's a ground ball pitcher and movement is one of his strongest, or probably will be his strongest trait ultimately. That's kind of what I think we're looking for in Colorado as far as our pitching staff. But although he does potentially have a 5-pitch arsenal, question whether he's really going to end up being a major league pitcher. That said, we've got a weak farm system. He's only 18 years old. We've made an offer to him in the past. He says he wants more money. So we are going to reach out to Mr. Kim now. I'm going to offer him that minor league. Oh, I actually didn't mean to offer him a minor league contract. Meant to, I screwed that up. I know he doesn't want a minor league contract. What I wanted him to do was offer a contract with a cash signing bonus as a minor leaguer, which I think he was looking for. So hopefully that's not going to keep us from bringing him on board. Hopefully he'll come back and tell us again he doesn't want to do a minor league contract. And we'll have an opportunity to maybe give him $50,000 or $100,000 as a signing bonus, and he'll come join our minor league organization. And one other thing that there's been comments about is my obsession with former players, in this case from the Pirates. And when I was with the Pirates, my obsession with former players from Kansas City. And we did flirt with a few players this offseason. Three-quarter Badger kind of noted that Isaiah Hill, our former superstar in Pittsburgh, who we traded away a few seasons ago when he started making big money, was a free agent this year. Did notice that, didn't think that we would be able to bring him on board. I'm doing a real poor job finding him. There he is. He was right on top. Yeah, I was going to say he signed with the Yankees. So he's definitely making big money, close to $30 million this year, and he's going to be making that amount for the next 4 years, and then he's got a vesting option. You can see his career has continued to be Hall of Fame caliber. He was a 2-time MVP, perennial All-Star, and a regular Silver Slugger winner with the Pirates, and he also won Rookie of the Year and MVP when he was a rookie, joining Fred Lynn and Ichiro in that excellent club. But you can see he's continued to have a streak of never having not driven in 100 runs with 3 straight 100 RBI seasons with the Dodgers. And as a 33-year-old, already has 426 homers, 1,239 ribbies, and a 57 WAR. So Mr. Hill still appears to be well on his way to the Hall of Fame, but not the type of player that we can afford yet in Colorado. But I do think if things go really well with this playthrough, probably is a little more potential for a significant increase in the budget here than maybe there was in Pittsburgh and Kansas City. Although by the end in Kansas City, I may have misspoken. It's possible that we were over $200 million in budget by then, because I feel like we were firmly in the middle market team territory in the mid-teens in terms of our budget back then. Obviously, things could have changed in terms of the overall money in the game over the past 11 seasons, but May have misspoke earlier when I said I've never had a budget this big during this playthrough. And also wanted to check in on another former Pirate that I flirted with this offseason. This is the guy that we picked #1 overall our first year as general manager of the Pirates, so 11 seasons ago, back in 2038. Henry Gonzalez got his career off to a nice start, winning Rookie of the Year, was a two-time All-Star early, wild card MVP a couple different times in those series, but has really kind of fallen off after those first two good years. We ended up trading him away rather than paying a big arbitration number for him last year. Given that I felt like I knew what I was getting with him, and I felt like maybe his bat could be rejuvenated in Coors Field, did flirt with him in the early stages of this offseason, thought about bringing him back. Again, when I had pretty poor scouting reports on just about the whole universe, felt like it made more sense to go with a player who I kind of knew rather than someone where I was completely reliant on a very low quality scouting report, but didn't end up bringing him on board. Three Quarters Badger did make the point that he's a pretty replacement level player at this point who doesn't really bring much to the table, and I seem obsessed with somehow trying to rejuvenate his career, but certainly you look his OPS last year with Toronto. He's with Baltimore now, but with Toronto was by far the worst of his career, and he's been on kind of a downward spiral, unfortunately, over the course of his career, which is kind of a weird pattern to see someone who was by far their best at 23 and 24, and then hasn't completely fallen off the face of the earth, but just is not the player that we thought he was going to be. And the last couple bits of housekeeping just to get caught up on everything I've been thinking about over the past week and some of the comments that we've gotten. Still have Andres Irizarry and Emmanuel Johnson on the trade block. These are guys in their mid-30s, two highest paid players on the team. They both had no trade clauses by virtue of 10-5 rights or 5-10 rights, depending on how you speak about those rights. That they were unwilling to waive when I first took over the team. At this point now, there is potentially some ability to move on from them. You can see that Johnson, who's in the last year of his contract, would consider a big load of teams. He's wrecked physically. And Irizarry, who's fragile, is also at a point where he would consider a trade to a lot of teams. So we do have the options to hopefully get something for those players this year before the trade deadline if we decide to move on. They are useful players for our team. They're productive guys. Johnson is our starting right fielder against righties and DH against lefties, and a guy who's hit 27 homers each of the last two seasons. And then Irizarry still slots in as our number 2 starter, a veteran who's a 4-time All-Star, left-handed pitcher, slots in behind Juan Vargas, who is a guy that we picked up as a free agent within the last couple of months. So an important starter for us and an everyday player for us, but particular with Irizarry, who's on the books again next year. If we can get an offer for him where we don't have to retain a lot of that big contract next year and get something useful in return, particularly if we fall out of contention, we would absolutely consider doing that. Did kind of have this final screen two screens before the season gets started. Did have the player development screen up briefly, I believe. Farm system ranks 19th overall. We were 18th when we took the team over. Obviously haven't done too much in terms of young players over the course of the offseason. Only one top 50 prospect in the system, Cameron Miller, who was picked in the first round, 33rd overall last year. Number 23 prospect, but he was signed so late by the previous regime that he did not actually play in the minors last year. So he'll be starting this year with us in rookie ball. Hopefully we can help get him to the majors in the next few years, because with that potentially really good movement, hopefully that'll play reasonably well in Colorado. And last but not least, mentioned at the end of our spring training episode that I felt like this was probably a 70 to 75 win kind of team. Let's see what the experts say. And yeah, kind of right there. Projected to to win 75 games, lose 87, which would be exactly what the Rockies did last season. Given that we did already trade away a couple of Silver Slugger winners from last year to free up some salary that we generally put into our minor league system and scouting rather than into the roster. If we could be flat with last season, given the talent that has left the team, I would think that would be a pretty respectable result. Again, I think it's more of a 70 to 75 win team. I think being right where the Rockies were a year ago is probably a bit ambitious. Old team Pittsburgh projected to win 98 games. We had guided them to 2 straight World Series appearances. So we'll see whether or not the Pirates make a 3rd consecutive World Series for the National League under new management. And with that, we're about ready to get the season started. A little bit of a different roster than what we've gotten used to in Pittsburgh over the last several years. We had such great stamina pitchers that we were often going with 12 pitchers in Pittsburgh and 14 position players. We're doing, I think, for OOTP at this point in 2023, more traditional 13 and 13 split between pitchers and everyday players. Kind of feel, especially with the number of runs that could be given up in Colorado, want to have as much flexibility in the pitching staff as possible. So we are about to get the season underway. As I said, I think it's a 70 to 75 win team. Don't know how pleased ownership is going to be if that's our result, because they want us to get to 500. Hopefully we'll be about as successful as this team was last year, and on the financial side, maybe do a little better than the team did last year, because certainly, as I mentioned, we're on pace to generate a lot more revenue per game. A lot of that's going to depend on how many people are coming to the park in July and August and September, particularly if we're 20 games out of first place. But, you look at last year and the team actually lost a little bit of money. Right now, our projection is to make about $10-11 million this year. So if we can come through with that, I would have to think that ownership will ultimately at least be somewhat satisfied with what we do if we, win 70 to 75 games, make them some more money, particularly if it turns out that the addition of Victor Gonzalez as catcher was viewed positively by management. So let's hope that he puts up some big numbers in Colorado this year. And we're already 0-1, a 8-2 loss at San Diego. So would hope that if we're giving up 8 runs, would think it would at least be happening in Colorado. This was bad to be happening in San Diego, but they have the top budget in baseball at this point. So the Padres are a pretty dominant team. We did hear back from Young Ha Kim. Says he's looking for something better, so we'll go into the offer contract. He wants a minor league contract with a bonus. We'll offer him $100,000 in a minor league contract. We will see if we can outbid Utica Independent League team. He is willing to think about it, so we will see whether we can bring John Thomas Kim on board into our minor league system. And we did get Kim signed, so nice to have him in the minor league system. He's with one of our DSL teams, which I think is a perfect spot for him to begin his career as an 18-year-old prospect. And we've made it through the month of March with a 3-4 record. Cohen, who I mentioned was a guy that ownership wants us to re-sign at first base. Just hit a 5-hit game when he hit for the cycle. So probably not going to make his price go down at all. He's a very productive offensive player, 47 and 45 home runs the last couple of years. Good personality in the clubhouse. But he is, going to be 31 after this season. He's a very mediocre defensive player. Once that power goes away, and some of his base running acumen perhaps deteriorates a bit as he gets older, just question how much value he's going to have. He's looking for $17 million a year for 7 years. No way I'm giving him a 7-year contract. We had tried earlier in the offseason to do a pretty short contract with some options in it. He didn't go for that. Given that he is a productive hitter in Colorado, he's a good personality, and ownership wants us to sign him, I think I'll throw an offer out there for him, but it's going to be shorter and for less money than he's looking for. So probably not something he's going to bite on. And we've got a contract proposal together for the Mad Bomber. The good news is that he was looking for an average annual salary of $17 million, and we're actually offering him a contract where the average annual value is $17 million. So that's in our favor. Probably the only thing in our favor, though, because he was looking for a 7-year deal with a opt-out for the player after 2 years and then a player option for the final season. We've instead turned it into a 4-year contract with team options the last 2 years, when the bigger money is in his contract that gets it up to that $17 million value. We did up the bonuses for MVP and All-Star a little bit. Can't imagine that he's going to go for this, but if we could get him at $15 million a year for the next couple years, which would actually be less than he's making right now in his early 30s. Don't think that contract's going to hurt us too much. Think he'll still be a pretty productive home run hitter in cores, good influence in the clubhouse, and it will also make ownership happy for what that is worth. Again, I don't think he'll go for it, but I think this would be a reasonable way to keep him on board if he did go for it. And he's actually willing to think about it. I'm a little surprised. Maybe getting the average annual value up to $17 million did the trick. But would be nice if we can get him on board. Obviously a little concerned about the amount of money we'll have available next year. But as we did already talk about, Emmanuel Johnson, very unlikely to be back. Wrecked physically, just don't see us putting a lot of money into him, and could be trading him away before the trade deadline this year if we can get anything decent in return. And then Andres Irizarry, again, we could potentially get that $21 million off the books next year, which would open up a lot more capacity for us to potentially do some interesting things next offseason as we try to retool, rebuild, and re-energize this team and organization. And we did get Jamal Cone signed to that extension. A little surprised for it. The fans were excited by it. So positive all aboard. 4 years, $68 million. But as we talked about, it's really 2 years, $30 million guaranteed for the next 2 seasons after this one. And then kind of we got the option as to whether we want to bring him back for 1 or 2 seasons after that. Hitting .333 this year with 3 home runs and 10 ribbies through our first 13 games. So he has remained pretty productive. Looking at the team, you may remember that fan interest was 97, so got a bump up to 99 there. Attendance per game already plummeting given the weak performance on the field of the Rockies thus far, but hopefully having Cohen on board for another couple years will get a few more people into the seats, and certainly at the very least will give us 1 win with ownership. Again, as I talked about, hopefully the signing of Victor Gonzalez will ultimately be viewed as a 2nd win, and if we can have pretty good results with 2 of their goals, then the most unrealistic goal, in my opinion, playing 500 ball this year, maybe we'll get a little bit of a cushion with ownership on potentially not achieving that goal. And the draft pool has been revealed, so that's some interesting news for us because we will be picking 11th in the upcoming draft following that 75 win season last year. So that is, we'll have an opportunity to potentially add the best or one of the best players in our entire minor league system, picking 11th overall if we do it right. That is the good news. The bad news is that after we briefly got up to 500 at 5-5, we've now lost 7 in a row to fall to 5-12, tied for the worst record in the National League with the Cubs. You can see our former team, the Pirates, is leading the Central at 10-7 here in mid-April. And another loss, and the news keeps getting worse for the Rockies. Jordan Medrano going to be out with a torn triceps for 4 months. So another starting pitcher gone. Joins Stephen Moore, who would have definitely been in the rotation, and Ramon Lopez, who would have been unlikely to have made the major league team. But 2 guys who were supposed to be in our starting rotation are now on the 60-day IL. And Nelson Escobedo, another one of our starters, is suspended for 3 games. Check in quickly. Obviously, it's early going in the season, but Irizarry 0-1 with an 8.64 ERA. Probably not going to make too many teams eager to be paying over $20 million a year for him for the next couple of years. And Juan Vargas, our key addition to the starting rotation in the offseason, 0-3 with a 10.19 ERA. So not very successful in Colorado so far. Juan Bin Daoud has been better. 2 saves from him. Hasn't allowed a run in 3 1/3 innings. Looking at a couple of the other new additions, Juan Castillo, who we brought over in a trade with Pittsburgh, hitting .318 with 14 runs driven in 66 at-bats. So it does seem like he is enjoying hitting in Colorado. And then Yoshitaro Nakahara, 267 average, 2 homers and 10 ribbies and 60 at-bats. So a couple of our former Pirates are producing reasonably well here in the early stages of the season in Colorado. Our new catcher, Victor Gonzalez, 276 average, which is more than acceptable. Only 1 homer and 58 at-bats. Felt like the thing that he would definitely be able to do in Colorado with that home run power was hit the ball out of the park. Obviously a small sample size with just 14 games played so far, and I'm not even sure how many of those were at home, but was expecting a little more power from him. But there's lots of time to see that in the coming days, weeks, months, and years. And we've actually won 3 games in a row, which only gets us to 8-13 after that 5-13 start. But Jose Brito out with a bone bruise in his wrist for 2 weeks. And for those of you who have watched our previous Pittsburgh series, injury pending on Yoshitaro Nakahara. Did hit a second home run since we last checked in on him, but or I guess he might have already had 2. I can't even remember at this point, even though it was literally seconds ago for those of you who are watching me. But Brito going to be out for a couple of weeks, so we will go ahead and put him onto the 10-day IL, bring up some reinforcements from AAA, and then we will find out what's going on with Nakahara. He's wrecked physically. We bench him when he reaches 95% fatigue level, and the only place that we have him in the starting lineup is as a designated hitter against right-handed pitchers. So doing everything we can to keep him from getting banged up, but he is a very challenged player physically at this point of his career. And at least instead of the 3 trips to the injury list that Nakahara had with the Pirates in his miserable season last year, 5 to 6 months with a torn meniscus, so his season is probably over. Put up a 111 OPS plus and a 122 WRC plus in the 16 games that he started for us, 17 games that he played. Maybe we'll have him back at the end of September, the last week of the season or something. But this season also started a little bit early. You can see we've already played 21 games and it's only April 17th. So I'm thinking this probably means he's done for the year. You may remember that we did sign him to a very cheap extension, so he potentially will be back with us next year. But obviously, his physical challenges have had a really negative impact on his career the last couple of seasons. And the Rockies stand at 10-19 now, 8 games back already here on April 26th. And that's not even the worst news. Right fielder Juan Gonzalez, broken kneecap, out for 8 to 9 months. Guy who hit 45 homers 2 years ago, 33 last year, and had 4 home runs in his first 34 at-bats this season, although he was hitting only a .176. Can see a player with exceptional home run power. Tough situation. His season is over, and the injury situation for this mediocre team is definitely getting out of control. You can see we've got a lot of guys who are hurt, and a lot of guys who are hurt seriously on the 60-day IL, which is where Juan Gone Part 2 is also going to be headed. Put him on the 60-day IL as well. The only thing that may be good about that, you can see he's got 2 years, 87 days of major league service, and his arbitration estimate was $4.2 million. I don't know if he's still going to be accruing service time while he's on the 60-day IL or not. And if he's not, that might mean that we'll at least have the option to bring him back at a minimum salary next year instead of somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 million, which would save us a little bit of money. But more importantly than saving money, we've got to find a way to start winning some games on the field and dipping into the kind of 4A guys that we have down in AAA, in this case bringing up Alex Palacios after he brought up Alex Perkins when Nakahara suffered that injury. Probably not the kind of moves that are going to be real difference makers for this organization. And we made it to the end of April, 14-19 record, 7 games back. Take a little deeper look at the standings. Not in last place. We're ahead of the Diamondbacks. We've won 5 in a row. So playing better ball over the last close to week at this point. But it's been a rough year. Interestingly, the Pirates, who are projected to win 98 games, standing at just 14-18 right now. So they're only half a game better than our ragtag bunch in Colorado at this point. Would expect them to bounce back from that a bit. A little more detail on how we've gotten to where we are at this point. 3-4 start in March and 11-15 April. So we've been pretty consistently poor, or at the very most charitable, below average over the first month plus of the season. Are scoring some runs, first in the NL in runs scored, and you can see we are first in almost every batting category, except we do strike out a lot, and we've only stolen 4 bases. Oof. But we've got the best offense in the National League, but we've got the worst pitching and pretty close to the worst defense in the National League. First in the league in runs scored with 196, 15th in runs allowed with 201. So I'd say the positive news is that our Pythagorean record is closer to 500 at 16-17. Looks like we've probably blown out teams a few times and then lost some close, higher scoring games. Given the injuries that we've had, would obviously like to be more successful, but can't complain about the start, particularly given that the underlying numbers suggest that we should be a few games better than we've performed so far, or a couple games better than we've performed so far. But it's going to be an interesting run with this Rockies team. I don't want to say this, but it's true. I'm not really trying to win this year. I'm just trying to kind of figure out who we've got throughout our system, get everyone scouted up well within our organization, get everyone who is a potentially upcoming free agent scouted up well. You can see we've still got low accuracy on some pretty big time players who are out there and going to be free agents. On the pitcher side, looks like we're a little bit better, but hopefully over the course of this year, we are going to be able to not just get ready for the amateur draft, which is going to be a focus of our scouting, but also get to know a lot better everyone kind of throughout the baseball world. And I do think that with the skills that Mr. Delgado brings to that task, we're going to have a pretty good sense of the baseball universe by the time we get to October and November, and we need to make decisions on arbitration players on our end and who potentially trade for, sign in free agency. It takes a little while when you take over a new team and you bring on a new scout, but I think Delgado is up to the task. So the goals I've talked about is to just not be horrible, get to 70, 75 wins this year and hopefully retain our job. And then really hopefully this coming off season be able to start trying to craft this team more in our image of what we think a winning baseball team in Colorado looks like. And the Rockies kind of playing win one, lose one here through the first week and a half of May. Still 5 games below 500. Emmanuel Johnson, who's a guy that we've been talking about potentially moving on from, did get the 2,000th hit of his career. 8 homers and 18 ribbies this year, hitting just 243. Not sure how much interest there's going to be for him and Erizeri. Hopefully there will be some as we get closer to the trade deadline. Doesn't seem like we are going to be a real competitor this year, which we didn't really expect, and as we've talked about, weren't even necessarily going for. But looking at the pitchers, Erizeri, one of the better pitchers who's out there available on the trade block, but there is a lot of talent and he's making a lot of money, so not sure how much demand we'll get for him. Taking a look at the batters, Johnson is in the top, maybe 20, 25 players that are available, but again, he's a 36-year-old who's wrecked physically and making a pretty good amount of money. So as we get closer to the trade deadline, we may try shopping those two a little more actively. But in the meantime, we'll wait and see whether anyone is interested in adding them to their teams over the next month and a half before potentially we need to get a little more aggressive as we get closer to the trade deadline. And the injuries continue for Colorado. Angel Moreno, 24-year-old reliever who we brought up from AAA when we had the injury to Jordan Medrano, now headed to the IL with a herniated disc in his back for the next 3 to 4 weeks. So hopefully not a serious injury for the youngster. Interested in seeing what he can potentially do for us. But it has been a rough year in terms of the injuries. If we were really hoping to compete, it would be pretty depressing. But the fact that we're 20-24 and kind of hanging in there, despite not really trying to win, and with all the injuries we've suffered, it's not a bad start to the season. Obviously, 20-24 is a bad record, but given what we're realistically trying to do this year, I'm kind of okay with how the season's going so far. Would obviously prefer fewer injuries, but that is what that is at this point. And with all those injuries, if you don't remember, we did hire a new trainer at the start of the playthrough, Ozzy Cedillo, who we think is pretty darn good. He's only good at preventing arm injuries. Typically, that's an area that we really like to focus, but he's excellent at preventing every other kind of injury. Excellent with fatigue recovery and rehab. He's average to outstanding. So not a perfect trainer, but I don't think that he's a big part of the problem. At least I hope he's not. We do have a lot of pitchers on the 60-day IL, but he's still good at preventing those arm injuries. So I think it's probably more a bit of bad luck than anything else. And it's still been kind of win one, lose one for the Rockies. 25-30, 5 games under 500, 8.5 back here on May 25th. The Pirates, though, have just fallen off the map. 19-36. You did see in the preview that they were projected to be a 98-win team, but last in all of baseball with 30th in runs scored. I don't know if they're just unlucky or have they gutted the roster. They still have Devin Smith, Alex Arroyo, and Sean Street in the rotation, and they added Jung-Hwan Pai in a trade with Seattle. Good personality. Looks like a solid pitcher. That low movement is not necessarily the profile I would go for, but they still have a lot of familiar names on the pitching staff. The lineup is obviously struggling. Still have Coronel at catcher, Zelaya, Julio Castillo, Danny Calez, Joel Fields, Arturo Arellano, Alex Racho. So they got a lot of the guys who were on the team last year, but the offense for them has been brutal. Feel bad for them, but honestly, it's not my problem anymore. And the problem for me is these Rockies. And the good news for these Rockies is that Stephen Moore is ready to come back from that injury that cost him a lot of time. Gonna send him on a rehab assignment since I can't remember at this point whether he was healthy at all for spring training or whether it was a lingering issue from. Okay, yeah, no, it happened in spring training on March 19th, 2-month injury. That's right, the strained forearm. So he missed the last week or so of spring training, and it's now been 2 months since he's picked up a ball. So I think probably going to need to give him a little bit of a rehab assignment down in Albuquerque, but certainly will be nice to have one of the guys who was supposed to be part of the rotation back. Would think that would likely allow us to move Ivan Mingetti out of this role that he's been in recently. He had been a follower at first, but he's actually started 2 games now, so I don't mind seeing my manager move on from the new and innovative follower type pitching into just someone who goes out and tries to beat you every 5th day, taking the ball in the top or bottom of the first inning. I am old school, remember. And as we get near the end of May, team playing a little better, and Jamal Cohen, who we signed to that extension, having a pretty good year this year, was just named NL Player of the Week and 18 homers and 59 ribbies with a 286 average so far this season. So he continues to be a very productive offensive player, perhaps helped a bit by the friendly confines of Coors Field, but felt like we wanted to bring him on board given his bat and given his the fact that ownership wanted him back. Thought that was a good move. Definitely struggling to play the 500 ball that they're looking for. You can see fan interest has been steadily deteriorating. That said, we're still got attendance up by almost 12,000 a game, and our revenue is up by close to 150,000 a game. So think we're doing okay financially. Who knows how long we're going to be able to keep that going, but playing a little better here in the month of May. We'll see how it finishes up at Pittsburgh for the next 4 games. Let's continue to put some pressure on the Pirates. You know, it would be nice to go to Pittsburgh and take 3 out of 4 against my former squad. And unfortunately, Pittsburgh beat us pretty bad yesterday, 9-1. Take a look at where things stand at the end of May in terms of the Rockies and how we are doing. as I mentioned, it was kind of a win one, lose one kind of month. We got a little bit of a run there, but ended up 15-14. So, in the context of what we think this team is and what we want to achieve, if we go 15-14 every month, I would absolutely take it. Still have the best offense in the National League in most categories. Thanks again, Denver, Colorado, Coors Field. Some thin air, some somewhat arid air, elevation. We like it. But the pitching staff, not surprisingly, is the worst in the National League. So probably the worst in baseball, I would have to guess, with a 5.66 ERA. I would be pretty confident that that is the worst in baseball. Obviously, we can get a better sense of that looking at the standings and just kind of hovering over things. Yeah, first, best offense in baseball and the worst defense in baseball. In Pittsburgh at this point, our former team is second worst offense in baseball, and their pitching staff has fallen on some hard times this year. Looks like with a 12,874 wins, 12,867 losses during the course of our time in Pittsburgh. We just got them over 500 for their career with all those winning seasons that we had strung together. But if they keep playing the way they're playing this year, they're not going to stay above 500 for very long. And we did not end up doing really well in that series with Pittsburgh. We lost the first game at the end of May that I talked about. Then we won, but then we lost two in a row. Did just get an 8-1 win over the Dodgers yesterday. See a lot of games coming up in division with San Diego, home and away, the Giants, Arizona, and then the Dodgers at the end of the month. So, not that we are really thinking we are a serious competitor for the division. Especially with the Giants and the Padres really starting to run away with it at this point. But we'll get some games against the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks, the teams that we're kind of competing with for third, fourth, and fifth place in the division most likely. A little more good news as far as the injury situation. The youngster Angel Moreno ready to come back. Stephen Moore, will check in on him. He's pitched twice, actually gone 14 innings in those two starts. So he's probably about ready to come back up to went 119 pitches 4 days ago. So going over 7 innings a game, 3.07 ERA, 2 starts in AAA. I think he's probably about ready to come. So we're going to actually look and see who we need to move on from to bring Moore back, and then need to decide whether we want Moreno still in the majors, or with Moore coming back, are there not enough spots on the roster, and will we put Moreno down in the minors in AAA for a while? And we did get Moore onto the roster, so hopefully he'll be starting in the next couple of days once he's fully rested. I think we're going to look to trade Kyle Alston. He's a soon-to-be 38-year-old. He is a fan favorite, very popular, and he's an Iron Man, but he's a soon-to-be 38-year-old pitcher who's put up an 8.63 ERA for us. He's just not part of our future. If we can get anything in return from him, would rather kind of continue to see what Moreno can do at the major league level. His lack of control to me is a huge red flag, and I don't think he's a player that I'm going to really want to build around. Probably someone we're more likely to move on from this offseason. But he is a hard-throwing ground ball pitcher with pretty respectable movement on his pitches and great stuff. So there's a chance maybe he's got a little bit of a recipe for success pitching in Colorado, even though he is going to likely walk a extremely frustrating number of batters. But there's a chance that he could be part of our future. There's a chance he would have some trade value if I don't want him to be part of the future. Kyle Alston, on the other hand, is certainly not part of our future. Fans won't be happy if we trade him away, which is just one of the quirks of the game. But if there's any kind of anything prospect-wise that we can get for him, probably makes sense to take the offer. Of course, no one offers us any prospects for him, but if we throw in some regulars there, maybe there's someone a little bit of worthwhile. Not a lot of options. We'll take a look at them. And I think we're going to try to put something together with Marvin Rodriguez from the Giants. Not a big time prospect, but he's 26 years old. He's younger. He's actually a former first round draft pick. Split time this year between San Francisco, where he hit 277, and Sacramento, where he's hitting 360. Kind of a fourth outfielder kind of guy. Wish he had a little more power. Does have good speed. Can kind of play anywhere out in the outfield. I don't think he's someone we're going to be building around, but he's a respectable, as I said, fourth or fifth outfielder, I think. And with all the injuries that we have already suffered this year, at this point, with both Nakahara and Juan Gonzalez likely out for the year, we've had Alex Palacios, a 32-year-old that we signed to, I believe we signed, minor league free agent contract. And then Alex Perkins, another guy that we signed to a minor league free agent contract, who are both in their early 30s, up with the team. Don't think that either of them is a long-term member of the organization, as we've talked about. Probably going to be moving on from definitely will be moving on from Emmanuel Johnson. The question is just, does it happen before the trade deadline or at the end of the season? So bringing in a somewhat younger outfielder to supplant likely Palacios or Perkins, moving on from Kyle Alston, and giving the youngster Moreno a chance to play and pitch at the major league level makes sense to me. So we're going to go ahead and work out something with Rodriguez. Always try to get a little more. Just see if the Giants, those rich teams from those big markets, will give us any money. All right, they're going to give us $600,000. We're going to trade them Alston, bring on Marvin Rodriguez. Insignificant popularity, so the fans aren't going to like it, but I'm not here to make the fans happy. I'm here to build a team that can eventually contend. And as we get close to mid-June, Rockies still just kind of scuffling along. 3 games under 500, 10 games out in the division. Another day, another injury. So that's not surprising at this point, quite honestly. But Danny Jackson, starting second baseman, hitting 287 for us this year. Going to be out with a hamstring strain for 3 weeks. So we will move him to the IL as well. May allow Jose Brito, who we picked up in the Rule 5 draft, to get a little more playing time, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world as we try to figure out what we might have or don't have with him. And obviously we'll also bring up some help from AAA. Did end up putting Marvin Rodriguez on the Major League roster, off to a really nice start, 476 average in his first 21 at-bats with us. And we sent the veteran Alex Perkins back down to AAA, since I don't think he's a big part of our future. And the injury situation here in Colorado remains challenging. Starting center fielder Tony Padilla now down with a strained MCL for about 5 to 6 weeks. He's hitting 298 for us, 23 doubles also. So not a lot of home run power with only 4, but 23 doubles and a batting average close to 300. Decent defensive center fielder, certainly someone who's respectable out there. So another loss for us, and certainly means that the veteran Alex Palacios probably going to slide into that spot for at least the next few weeks. Would prefer that there's someone else to play. Maybe Marvin Rodriguez will get some more time. We may end up force starting Rodriguez. That's not the worst idea in the world, just to get him a little more action. Palacios has kind of been a center fielder for a lot of his career, but you can see we have pivoted him to right. So could be an opportunity for Marvin Rodriguez to get a little playing time. So given that he's a guy that we just picked up in trade, not happy that the injuries continue to come, but we're 4 games under 500, and we're kind of at least maintaining a veneer of respectability despite the frequent trips we've had to the IL here in 2049 so far. And although we are 4 games under 500 here on the first day of summer in 2049, Rockies continue to not be allowed to have nice things. Stephen Moore looks like he's going to be headed right back to the IL. Was 1-0 with a 2.31 ERA with the big club since he came up. And third baseman Jonathan Andrade out with a strained ab for 7 to 8 weeks. So the injuries continue to pile up, and a lot of them aren't these day-to-day kind of things. You can see even here on June 21st, we've got guys out months and weeks in most cases, rather than some of these lingering couple-day kind of injuries. So we'll find out what happens with Moore, and we'll continue to look to AAA for some help. But our farm system is not that deep and not that strong. Obviously, after we have another off season and a first draft with the team to kind of build things up, should be looking better next year. But we tried to turn over a decent amount this off season, but and we tried to bring on some new talent. But there's only so many players that you really want out there who are available as minor league free agents every year, who kind of fit the personality I'm looking for in terms of great personality profile and some level of ability on the field. So we're not deep in the minors, and that lack of depth is definitely being tested with this rapidly growing injury list for the Rockies. And that injury will allow us to bring Alex Ortega, 25-year-old, up to play third base. We had been training him to play first a little bit, but kind of has a pretty good profile for a third baseman with that gun of an arm, decent range and error rating. The turn DP rating is poor, but he's a guy who's interesting. He could be a contributor for us going forward. Hitting just 262 this year in AAA, but does have 16 home runs, 26 homers last year in AA. And that home run power is likely to play pretty well in Colorado. So we are going to bring him up to the majors, and we are going to play him at third base every day. Find out what maybe we have. No need in finding out what Tony Cordova, 31-year-old, who we brought up a week or so ago when we had the last injury, can do when we got a guy who could be a member of this team for a few years to come in Alex Ortega. So we'll try to make the most out of the injury and see what Ortega can do over the next 5 or 6 weeks while he's got his first crack at major league pitching. And did get finally the diagnosis on Stephen Moore, going to be out with an oblique strain for 3 weeks. So could have been worse, but certainly adds to the issues this team is having in terms of injuries. Going to have to tap down to AAA for some more help. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of help coming. Still have the best offense thanks to Coors, and still have the worst pitching in the league thanks to Coors. Another kind of 500-ish month so far, 10-11 record. Would love to get up to 500 or perhaps even a game over 500 like we were in May by the end of the month. But with the number of guys that we have on the IL, certainly feel like we, to an extent, have a hand tied behind our back as we're trying to fight. Check in with Charlie Monfort. He's not pleased that we're not playing 500 ball. He is glad that we brought Gonzalez on board at catcher, and he is kind of finally delivering some of the power that we thought he might in Coors. 258 average, but 12 homers and 41 ribbies and 256 at-bats. Happy we re-signed Jamal Cohen, who's got 23 home runs, and he's pleased with attendance. So he's been ecstatic with our progress towards the goals, but his overall impression of us on and off the field not as highly. Seems a bit obsessed with us playing 500 ball, but I think we're close enough. And with the additions of Gonzalez and Cohen, hopefully he'll be pretty pleased with us by the end of the year. You can see that we've got some coaches whose contracts are going to be coming up. Not going to spend a lot of time stressing out about that right now. Uh, None of the top prospects in baseball here in Colorado, not surprisingly. We've got about a week or so till the end of the month. Obviously, we've got to go down to AAA and find some help for our pitching staff, and then we will check in and see what this team looks like as of the start of July. And these injuries have been about as bad as I can ever remember. Marvin Rodriguez, the center fielder we were trying to give a little bit of run to, he's now also out with a strained MCL for about 6 weeks. So, unfortunately, we're not going to get to know him all that much better, at least until the month of August, most likely. So, Rodriguez will be joining many of his teammates on the injured list. Hopefully won't end up being a long-term thing, but we are up to 9 guys at the major league level on the IL at this point, which is definitely challenging when you're not that good of a team. So we ended up going back to AAA for another one of our 4A guys, Oscar Altamirano, who's actually spent 10 years in the majors. But at this point, you look at that batting profile, and 4A guy is probably a fair description of him. But he still has pretty good outfield range, captain personality. Not the worst guy to bring up to help us out in a pinch. Another one of those minor league free agent signings we made as we tried to bolster the Rockies organization a bit this past winter. And a little bit of good news, starting second baseman Danny Jackson ready to come off the IL. He had one of the less serious injuries that we've dealt with this year. Probably will send Tony Cordova, the 31-year-old, back down. Only had 8 at-bats, did get 2 hits in those 8 at-bats, but another one of these guys who is not a big part of our team, needs to clear waivers, so we'll go ahead and waive and DFA Mr. Cordova, put Mr. Jackson back onto the lineup. Check in on the young third baseman Alex Ortega. Off to a nice start his first week in the majors, 375 average, 2 homers, 7 ribbies, and 24 at-bats. So, the blessing of the injury to Andrade is that it gives us an opportunity to see what Ortega can do at the major league level. And not surprisingly, he's proven that he can hit for some power in Colorado so far. So we've made it to July, 43 and 47. That 477 winning percentage puts us on pace for about 77 wins. So given that we thought this was a 70 to 75 win team, the projection had us at 75, and we've had a ton of injuries. I kind of think we're doing okay. Obviously not going to be making a run at the World Series. Still have an incredible offense. It's going to be interesting to kind of over time figure out, how much of that is us, how much of that is Coors. Obviously the ballpark's a big part of it. Taking a look at the metrics in Coors, obviously a lot more home runs for both left and right-handed batters. Big boost in batting average for left and right-handed batters, more doubles, crazy amounts of triples. It is a hitter's park, and not surprisingly, we're hitting well there at home, but we are 15th in the league in runs allowed. I think anytime we can kind of maybe even just get into the top 10 in pitching, we're probably going to be a pretty formidable team. Have been solid over the last 2 months, a game over 500 in May and right at 500 in June. We'll take a quick look at our top performers and then dip into international free agency quickly before we finish up the episode. And the pitching, as we've talked about, has had a lot of injuries and hasn't been great. Juan Vargas, the free agent we brought on board to be our top starter, 4-7 with a 5.31 ERA. Still think that really good movement and ground ball rating could play pretty well here. The issue is he's been a pretty good pitcher, a pretty good starter throughout the course of his life, which is why I was a little comfortable with the fact that that fourth pitch, the change is awful and the splitter's below average, but thought he was kind of a proven commodity with what he had done over the course of his career. You can see a six-time All-Star. But obviously it hasn't translated to Colorado that well, kind of dipping into the splits a little bit. Can we see home versus away? There's obviously got to be a way for me to do that. There we go. 2,049 pitching splits. Very simple. 580 ERA at home, 475 on the road. So he's been a little better on the road, but hasn't been exceptional. He's unhappy. I'm guessing that has to do with his performance. Yeah, that's what made him most unhappy. Not thrilled with how the team's doing coming to us from the Yankees, I'm sure. But a lot of this is on him. Hopefully he can do better going forward. Iritzeri, who we may be moving on from, 5-3 with a 4.79 ERA. Chris Gonzalez, 7 wins. Nelson Escobedo, 6. And Elijah Ruiz, who's just joined the rotation with some of those injuries that we've had, 1-1, a 3.84 ERA. He's spent a lot of time out of the bullpen. Juan Bin Daoud, ugly 6.56 ERA, has saved 15 games. And you can see we've got a lot of sickly earned run averages out of the bullpen right now. The only exceptions are the lefty Jordan Stallworth, 3.02 ERA, and righty Danny Arujo, who we have brought up a couple of times when we've had injuries, but he spent most of the year in the PCL, but a 2.79 ERA while he's been up. Angel Moreno, who we had talked about earlier, has gotten lit up in some of his recent performances, 6.75 ERA, striking out an insane amount of batters with 16 and 8 innings. But he's also walking an insane amount of batters with 14 and 8 innings. So don't think he's going to be a long-term guy for us, but he's younger than most of the guys on the staff. Might as well get a sense of whether there's anything there with this guy before we make some more potentially substantive changes to the roster this offseason. Big question over the month of July is what we do with Iritzeri. Do we find a deal where we can get that contract off the books for next year? I'm inclined to think that's the direction I'm going to try to go over the next month. Turning to the offense, which obviously has taken advantage of Coors, new catcher Victor Gonzalez, 257, 19 doubles, 12 home runs. Kind of doing what we hoped. Actually, I hoped probably for a little more power than we've seen from him. But good production offensively for a catcher, and he's respectable defensively. Put up a 1.3 WAR for us, a little more than midway through the year, so can't complain about that. Jamal Cohen, as we talked about earlier this episode, signed him to an extension. He's hitting 264, 26 homers, 81 driven in. Jose Brito, the Rule 5 acquisition, made a big jump for us this year. Just kind of need to keep him on the roster for the year, and then maybe he can get a little more seasoning. But he is also almost 27 years old, kind of is what he is at this point. He's been a useful offensive player. Good to have second baseman Danny Jackson back. Alex Ortega, the youngster, 290 average, 2 homers and 31 at-bats. So his last couple games have been a little slower. Juan Castillo, favorite of ours from Pittsburgh, brought him over to play short for us. 316 average, 16 homers. You can see Coors right there. You look at his production in Pittsburgh the last couple years, and granted, these were probably the 2 worst seasons of his career, but he has definitely been rejuvenated by Coors. Take a look at those batting splits, and 348 at home, but still hitting 290 on the road with actually more home runs on the road. So maybe we just kind of needed to get Castillo into a new environment. Good to see some nice production there. Andrew Booker, 351, 13 homers. Emmanuel Johnson and Oscar Altamirano, who are both banged up now. No shock. Johnson is another guy we may be looking to trade. His contract is up at the end of this year. He is wrecked physically. Going to be 37 years old in the offseason. Having a nice year, 290, 18 home runs. Maybe he can help a contender and we can get a little bit for him. And then with all the injuries, Alex Palacios and Alex Perkins, two veterans who we picked up as minor league free agents, who have spent part of the year in Double A, part of the year in Triple A, and then part of the year in the majors with us. Palacios hitting 284 with 8 home runs. Perkins 227 with only 3 home runs. So a lot of important guys on the IL also right now. Starting third baseman, starting DH, starting center fielder, starting right fielder, and 2 guys who are expected to be in our rotation. So good news with Medrano and Moore is that they both look like we could get them back in July, which particularly if we do move on from Eritzeri could help at least keep the, I can't say respectable. I was going to say keep the rotation respectable, but we're 15th in the league in ERA. I guess the best I can say is hopefully if we can bring both of those guys up over the next 3 or 4 weeks, even if we move on from Eritzeri, hopefully the additions of Medrano and Moore back into the rotation will keep us from getting any worse. And last but not least, we've got some international amateur free agents. Our scouting reports aren't great, but our scout thinks there's some talent here, at least among the batters. I'll take a quick look among the pitchers. There's a couple there that are interesting. Rod Batista, 16-year-old out of Venezuela. Oof. Like that movement potentially for Coors, like the stamina. Left-handed pitcher, only 16 years old. He's intriguing. Bobby Monroy, little less interested in him. About half a year older, doesn't have the same kind of movement potential. Obviously going to spend some time looking, and we've only got low scouting accuracy, Monroy, where at least we're average with Rod Batista. Going to look at those guys that our scout thinks are 5-star prospects with the bats, but quite honestly, if we had to make an offer to Rod Batista, would not view that as the worst thing in the world. Think that there's a little bit of potential there. But according to our scout, at least, there's some crazy potential with some of these hitters. Right fielder Joel Bueno, that contact and home run power, good personality. He's a corner outfielder, probably a left fielder in a perfect scenario, but that bat would play well anywhere, particularly in Coors. So he is a pretty intriguing prospect. We've got an average accuracy on him. Center fielder Felix Madrigal, also average accuracy there. Not really a center fielder, but again, a pretty nice potential bat based on what we think we know. Luis Munoz, a right fielder, another nice bat, durable, barely 16 years old. Again, a corner outfielder like those other guys, but they all have some decent bats. I'm really interested in seeing what Alex Palomino looks like, though, just because we've got high accuracy on him. Before I even look at him, I'm going to look at the average accuracy on Ruben De Leon and maybe save the best for last. De Leon better defensively than the other guys. Looks like a solid potential offensive player. Not all that smart, not all that adaptable, but interesting prospect. But I'm hoping there's something special here with Alexis Palomino. Pretty good contact, pretty good home run power, left-handed batter. Another corner outfielder, a little bit more of a right fielder, though, with that arm. Would hope that the error rating would be better. The fact that we've got high scouting accuracy on him probably moves him to the forefront a little bit compared to those other guys. Munoz, like the durability, like the good eye. Madrigal. I think it's just, Bueno, really like the personality here, and he, I think, is the best bat. Barely 16 years old, out of Venezuela. It's just a matter of the lack of the scouting report compared to what we know about Palomino. And a lot of times I don't feel like I have real hard decisions to make. The one guy that I target in international amateur free agency is kind of obvious, but there's three guys I'm kind of interested in here. Bueno, I think, at least according to what we think of his potential ratings right now, is the best offensive player. I really like the personality. The only concern is that we've only got average scouting accuracy. Maybe look at what the OSA thinks. OSA likes him, almost even more as far as the contact, the gap power, and the home run power. And granted, the gap power with his mediocre speed isn't all that important. Our scout thinks, avoiding Ks is a little better than the OSA. I like the personality. I think this is a pretty good guy, barely 16 years old, to bring into the system. Alexis Palomino, I just like the fact with him that we've got the high scouting accuracy. He's about half a year older. Profiles is not quite as good, but still, is someone with potentially 70 contact and 70 home run power. Could be a very productive player in Colorado offensively. And then I'm not going to lie, I am intrigued by Rod Batista. Love the movement. Love the stamina. Love the ability to hold runners. Looks like, 3-pitch arsenal probably will develop. Lefty. Also very young. But I think, and I would love to know, those of you who are still watching at this point, whether you would have gone with one of the players that I went with or somebody else. I think I'm going to go with Joel Bueno. Our scout doesn't know him as well as he knows Palomino, but he is still saying, kind of exceptional contact and home run power. I love the high work ethic and intelligence. Tend to think if there's someone who's going to reach whatever potential he has, it's probably someone like Bueno. And looking at Palomino, I guess Palomino's a little better on the base paths, but it's not so significant that I think it's a deal breaker either way. I feel like we're going to need bats in Colorado. Obviously, with the worst pitching staff in baseball, we're going to need arms as well. And certainly that could become an area to focus on in the amateur draft that's coming up in the next episode. I just don't know that Batista... I don't know. I like Batista. I really do. The movement should play well in Colorado. That's going to be off the charts, or close to off the charts. Not sure about a finesse pitcher who doesn't throw all that hard in Colorado, but granted, he's a 16-year-old who's already throwing in the low 90s. That number could go higher. I thought I had moved on from Batista, but those of you who have watched me know that I always love to go with the pitchers if at all possible. But Joel Bueno, oof. It seems like it's really a potentially special bat. And he's got the personality. We're going to go with Bueno. Would definitely love to hear what others think, but we're going to offer him the full $5 million to start. Ask him for a response, submit the offer, and we will find out what happens with Mr. Bueno, if it doesn't work out with him, whether Palomino or Batista are still available. If it doesn't work out with Bueno, going to be interesting to see what happens there. But seems like, at least according to our scout, it was a pretty strong crop of international amateur free agents this year. We'll see whether we are able to lure Mr. Bueno to Colorado. And we will find out the result of that. We will find out the result of the amateur draft. We will find out the result of the All-Star game, and we will find out what we end up doing on the trade market in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.